Today we'll be hearing from Nicholas Eftimiades in a lecture titled Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics. Nicholas Eftimiades is a professor of Homeland Security at Penn State University. He retired from the U.S. Department of Defense in 2017. His 34-year government career includes employment in CIA as a special agent in the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and a senior intelligence officer in Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Eftimiades held positions in analysis, human and technical intelligence collection, and leadership. He served overseas for 10 years. Mr. Eftimiades is recognized as a leading authority on China and its espionage activities. His book, Chinese Intelligence Operations, was the first ever scholarly examination of the structure, operations, and methodology of the intelligence service of the People's Republic of China. His recent book, Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics, second edition, updates that work and is the most detailed account ever published on China's intelligence operational tradecraft. Eftimiades testified numerous times before Congress as a certified expert in U.S. courts and advises government agencies and private industry. Nick is a frequent lecturer and public speaker on China and national security issues. He has appeared as an expert on dozens of television and radio broadcasts. He has been quoted in hundreds of newspapers and magazines across the world. He has taught over 1,000 U.S. government counterintelligence officers and commercial industry insider threat specialists. Mr. Eftimiades has an MS Strategic Intelligence, National Defense Intelligence College, and a BA in East Asian Studies from George Washington University. He has lived and studied in Asia for 5 years. Mr. Eftimiades held senior appoints on the DoD Defense Science Board, DHS Homeland Security Advisory Council, Economic Security Subcommittee, and as an intelligence community associate for the National Intelligence Council. Eftimiades was also a senior research fellow for 6 years at King's College War Studies Department in London. With that, please welcome me in joining Mr. Nicholas Eftimiades. Again, if anyone has a question, please use the Q&A function and we will get to it as soon as possible.
Shannon, thank you very much for the introduction. I hope my presentation is longer than that. I should have given you a shorter one, but thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here for IWP. I think probably a lot of you know me, by reputation, at least in this sphere, and I've been at it my entire adult life. Went to school in Taiwan and research in mainland China, and have been following this and studying it and working against it, for my whole life. So what I'd like to share with you today is sort of what I've come up with out of my my new book, which has been the update for my book on Chinese espionage operations and tactics. Shannon, can you just tell me, is my slideshow appearing?
It's currently blank right now. I think it's loading.
Okay. Well, let's hope technology is not failing us. It's not come up yet?
No, not yet. Do you want to try
I'm
stopping and starting the share again?
Right. I'm going to just start sharing again. So folks, bear with me here.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Because the question is often asked, how are you coming to these conclusions? I am going to start by assuming I can get into slideshow mode. Yes. Okay. I'm going to start by walking through a little of what I do and how I do it, in particular the analytical methodology, on how I'm going to explain the conclusions that I've come with, in this presentation. So we'll start with that so you can get an understanding of it, and then look into actual espionage cases. We'll look into some players and cases, and then analysis of those and many, many other cases to kind of squeeze out analytical conclusions on what we can understand about Chinese espionage, specifically their operations and tactics, right? Other people will tell you about the history and the organization of espionage, and I got it. That's their world. My world very much focuses on sort of the street perspective, exactly what the tradecraft is like, what are they using against what type of target sets. and how are they, how do they go about accomplishing that? And that's kind of in depth. We'll discuss that in the analysis of espionage cases. And then I'm going to go into a different section, which I explored the latter part of last year and have brought out, which is motivations. So I went through all these cases and was able to assign motivations for why the person was doing what they were doing. And it really it's interesting. It kind of breaks a paradigm of what we've had as motivations and why they're, what motivations are used to conduct espionage or to recruit people to conduct espionage. So with that in the case, and I guess you can put your questions in, and I'll try and do this in 45 minutes or so, and then we can save some time for questions and answers. All right. So this is just my database as an FYI. This is kind of an old screenshot. You can see on the lower left, there are 880 records. This is a last year screenshot. I now have currently 924 cases. So that's what you'll be looking at, the data crunched from over 900 cases of let's call it espionage. We'll have some definitions here, and I'll show you those in just a second. So again, here's just a view of what my database looks like. You can see that name, the person's age at the time, the start date, the stop date, the nationality, citizenship, the person's employment, any associates. So I can look up things like universities and search a name for universities and get half a dozen cases maybe that lead back to that university. Other individuals as well. Case numbers, if it's a U.S. case, categories, and we'll walk through a bit of this. So the categories in particular, I broke up into espionage, economic espionage, covert action. For our purposes, covert action, you might think more of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and what the FBI typically calls espionage light. That they're acting covertly on behalf of a foreign government. I call it covert action because that's exactly what it is, and it's a worldwide database, right? So they don't call it FARA in London or Tokyo. So, but it is a covert action. So that's what I listed as. EAR, ITAR, IEPA, and ASEA are all, as I'm sure you're aware, export violations, technology export violations, export administration regulations, ITAR, etc. So those are all different categories of export violations. Research violation, that's what we would typically call it in academia, where someone has taken academic research, stolen academic research. We see, there's a fair amount of that. So I have that in a separate category. And then civil cases, which I probably shouldn't have broken out into, but broke a number of them into civil cases, not many actually. If you can see there, so on the right-hand side of your screen now, I took and went through all these cases, and for those who were technology related, I have a pull-down menu and assigned them to a technology identified in Made in China 2025. So you'll see how that lends out. And there are over 500 of those cases, but you can see then exactly where their emphasis is going and then actually break it down by the type of tradecraft against a specific type of technology. What you're seeing on the left side of your screen, the Ministry of State Security, the PLA, state-owned enterprises, private companies, and PRC other. Those are the individuals involved in doing the operation. I call it the customer, but they're the individuals involved in doing the operation. Had I known earlier, had I thought about it earlier, I probably would have broken down PRC other into United Front Work Department, Ministry of Public Security, because they come up somewhat frequently. Universities come up, or research institutes come up, and I just created an other category, which but I can't go back and correct it now. Okay, and on the right side, probably the most important part is Tradecraft. There are two components of Tradecraft. You'll see the pull-down menu, which allows me to bin this type of tradecraft: false names, documents, commercial encryption, or meetings in China. Third country meets, customized encryption. We've seen that as an expansion of their capabilities as of late, in particular. Cyber with insider, with an insider, and cyber. I removed most of the cyber from the what you're going to see today, because I don't, it's not, I'm not a professional in cyber, right? And I don't, and there are thousands and thousands of cases, as you know, tens of thousands of cases, and I don't track them. I don't track them down. I leave that to other, professionals. But in cases where the FBI has really put people on a wanted list or something like that, I'll capture them, but I don't factor it into the analysis normally. Okay, when you have all that type of data on, and now I'm at 924 cases, right, total. When you have that type of data, you can really crunch some amazing things and results. You can take a look at the overall effort of what Chinese espionage looks like, how much they're putting into each area. Understand the total cases, the total effort that they put in for various subject areas, various types of technologies, and you can do a lot understanding the tradecraft and break that up against tradecraft specifically against, let's say, the aerospace industry. And what you find as you look at this is that not only do the people change that are doing this, but how they're doing the work of espionage changes. You do not find the same tradecraft going against aerospace industry that you do against the IT industry or the bio industry. And this is, again, just leave cyber out of it completely. But you still have dramatically different approaches that are taken in each one of these industries. So if you're in industry, it really helps to know what you need to be protecting against. And the same thing if you're in the government as well. You can also do some cool stuff and then say, okay, well, let me take a look at, and this example is all the export enforcement related cases. And here I have them broken down by state, but you can break down by city and the specific technology within cities. So if you're putting up defensive measures, so to speak, or if you're going to go talk to companies or something like that, it really helps to know, well, I know exactly where they're targeting and exactly what type of technology that they're targeting in every city. So those are the things that you can do just sort of with the database as a whole. Let's walk through a couple of cases just to kind of sensitize you to what's going on. I'm sure that everyone knows that there are two types of collectors: the traditional collectors, as we call Ministry of State Security, Public Security, the CMC Joint Central Military Commission Joint Intelligence Bureau, the Political Work Department Liaison Bureau. And I personally don't like this construct of traditional and non-traditional. That's our Western, that's an American way of seeing it. It's not the way the Chinese see it. But that said, you have state-owned enterprises. There's something in the order of 360,000 of them. I would bet 100,000 or so are at the central government level. And this is not people, this is companies, state-owned enterprises. And so, maybe 112, I think, are their national champions, which have 100,000 or more each in each company. But they do active collection work. So their theft of technology is aggressive. CCP organizations such as United Front Work Department, universities and scholars, companies and individuals. I wouldn't go into it, but as I'm sure you all know, the 2017 National Intelligence Law and the implementing regulations subsequent to that, of that same year, require Chinese nationals to provide information when requested by the government, whether it's in China or overseas. And we see that a lot with the student population. So it's a pool that they choose to draw off of. So let's look at our first case, which is Wenxing Zhao, or Zhao Wenxing. Thomas Zhao. It was from 2022 to 2023. Thomas was in the Navy, and he was recruited online through a Chinese WeChat stock investment group, right? He was in a stock investment group. From there, he was identified. The guy that approached him, assuming it's a guy, he was an intelligence officer, MSS, and he used a cover of a maritime think tank to approach Zhao. You'll notice the cover of think tank has become pervasive. I've even seen them using the Atlantic Council as a think tank. Sometimes real think tanks, very often real think tanks that they use, and obscure email addresses and things. So we see the use of a maritime think tank to approach Zhao. And they use Telegram, WeChat, Apple, and PayPal for communications and for payments. Zhao used what they call as a dynamically encrypted IP address, obviously an IP address that changes to transmit sensitive information. He, at the guidance of his handler, used his personal cell phone and went into secure military locations and facilities. He took photos of dozens of computer screens, took videos of equipment. He repeatedly, again, at the direction, his OPSEC, right, his operational security, at the direction of his handler, deleted and destroyed evidence of his communications and information. The IO, the intelligence officer, wanted to pay Zhao to purchase a new phone. We see this regularly. Zhao was kind of interesting. He was, because I've read a lot in their discussions, and he was actually hesitant to work and sometimes even to accept payment. So I don't know what quite was going on in his head. Like, no, you don't have to pay me. I mean, just things like that, which were really surprising to see. But the information he did pass included, locations and timing of naval force movements, information, amphibious landing, distributed maritime operations, 2021 PACF, CONOPS, naval fleet exercises, CONOPS, operational orders of military training exercises. That he took 12 different computer screens he took pictures of. Blueprint of the electrical system on the Gator storage. You can read that, and the task-oriented radar systems in Okinawa, our systems in Okinawa. Okay, one case, kind of concurrently, same time, we have Patrick Wei Jintao, who is currently under in court in California. He's fighting this. Zhao did not, but Wei did. He, again, was recruited in 2022 online. His collection priorities were pretty similar: fleet movements, technical weapons systems, Marine Corps exercises. A lot of different in a personal relationship with his PRC intelligence officer, who offered to bring Wei and his mother for a visit to China. Wei's mother encouraged him to spy, telling him that it would lead to a good job in China. It could lead to a good job in China. At this time, by the way, he was going for his U.S. citizenship, and he did become a U.S. citizen in 2022. I'm going to guess this is where he messed up, because he told a fellow sailor he was, obviously that the Chinese were trying to recruit him for espionage. And the FBI later then in the criminal complaint speaks of an informant who provided them information. So I'm guessing that this is what happened. But again, he was directed by the IO for specific collection priorities. He directed him to film blueprints and take cell phone photos. The two communicated using several commercial encryption methods, WeChat being the primary. Telegram as well. The instructor officer, the IO, again, same type of OPSEC. Don't talk about the relationship, destroy any evidence of communications, and he got paid between 10 and 15 grand for his activities. Actually, before we jump into Linda's son, I'll tell you some interesting things about Wei, which he was in contact with his mother, and I mean, literally saying, I got fellow sailors who are driving Ubers at night, and I just have to spy and pass off information, and I'm making this kind of money. So he seemed to be pretty, and I mean, they haven't recorded him saying that with his mom. So I think he seemed to more enjoy the job. Okay, let's look at a different kind of case. This case is Linda's son, and this is what I would call, the covert action or the covert influence cases that we've been seeing, and a lot of. And I'll tell you that people ask, well, are they more and more aggressive in this? I don't know if they're getting any more aggressive, or we're just starting to pay attention to it, because I know cases that were reported to the Bureau 10 years ago that they're just now, elected to investigate. So sometimes it's a function of law enforcement priorities and when they try and put emphasis on it, and sometimes it's a function of the aggressiveness of the Foreign Service, and I don't know which one in this case is, but it is clear that a lot more is becoming public that these cases are happening. There was a think tank that a couple of years ago put out a document, Safeguard Defenders. If you've never seen it, you should. It's the 110 police stations over, worldwide that China is basically threatening or tracking down its fugitive population through. And it's an eye-opening report, and that was really an amazing genesis for getting governments to move on this issue. All governments started reacting when that came out. So, okay, a little diversion. Let's jump back into Linda. Linda is a naturalized U.S. citizen. She was born in China and resided in New York. She had the following jobs with at New York administrations at the state level. Okay, Director of Asian Affairs. She had a Queens regional representative. You can see just the list of the type of jobs she had. So she was fairly in place within the bureaucracy at the state level. Okay. While she was in place at that time, she was taking direction, and this went from, I think, about 2012 upward. So we're talking a good solid 10 years. She was taking direction from the PRC Consul General in New York, Huang Ping, and 3 or 4 other diplomats in the political section of the Chinese consulate. And what she was doing at their direction was manipulating New York State's policy towards the PRC by supporting China's policies, dismissing human rights issues, increasing economic interactions, and politically excluding Taiwan. So she's still in court, so it's still where this is alleged, but she became the go-to person. Oh, it's China, it has to deal with China, send it to Linda. Okay, that was sort of the work that was going on inside the governor's office. And so she wound up stopping any official access between Taiwan and the governor's office for 2 governors, Cuomo and Hochul. She altered language on state policy positions on China's human rights violation. She repeatedly directed the staff not to respond to inquiries on policy positions towards China. I'll handle it, and then it would let it die on the vine. She allowed this was a kind of a key one. She allowed the PRC officials to covertly listen in on official state business telephone calls. So as they were having calls deciding on trade issues or deciding in response on human rights issues for, dealing with China, she would actually allow them to sit in on the calls. So, and this is kind of the kicker on it, is that she actually signed Governor Hochul's signature on 2 invitation letters to secure visas for Henan province trade delegations. So, and this was actually done through the East Coast Henan Association, which is a nonprofit in New York, which is under the United Front Work Department. Okay, for her support, and you see this as sometimes a way of payment, if you will. Henan officials provided her favorable business deals to her husband, Chris Hu. I think the secondary or the superseding indictment now is about 44 million that they made, through this. And it was basically through COVID contracts of PPE that they were able to push towards her and his company, and they made millions and have, a $3 million home and another similar place in Hawaii. So that was the kind of cover, if you will, for the payment to do it through business, which is a common thing if you can do it, if the type of circumstances warrant it. And he had a number of businesses that could. Tradecraft involved. She communicated through emails, phone calls, WeChat, text messages, and personal meetings. As I mentioned, her husband received preferential business contracts. She coordinated activities with PRC diplomats and the NGOs supporting the United Front Work Department. The NGOs were used as cutouts for policy initiatives. So that they actually laundered a lot of money through proceeds of a relative who apparently didn't know it, an elderly relative, for the bank account. So I think they're up for charges on money laundering as well now. Okay, I think I've discussed that. Medical supplies during the COVID crisis. So I think if you take a look on the way Linda spreads out here and, her contacts reach out, you can see on the left, the PRC officials in the consulate and the political section who had her input to her, the United Front Work Department. And this is, again, that's who she's serving here, the United Front Work Department. On the right, the upper right, the nonprofits that she was involved with. Now, some of these nonprofits also go back, which I'm sure the FBI has investigating, go back to other politicians, which is it's a difficult thing to look at because it's the responsibility of a politician, of course, to pay attention to their constituents. And if the All China Federation of Returned Overseas Chinese is a constituent group, of course, politicians are going to be responsive to that and go to parties and things like that. Be photographed with people with the leadership of there. That's just normal. However, in this case, knowing that those organizations were also doing things that were aiding and abetting an action like this and could be construed as illegal. I don't know if the Bureau is going to go that far to look at that. So it walks down a very, very difficult path for U.S. politicians. I've had members of Congress say just the same thing. Nick, I have no idea who's walking into my office. They walk into my office. I know they're a constituent. I know they're working in my district, or they have a factory in my district, or they're for some organization in my district, but I have no idea what that means. And in this case, particularly, both of those associations are under the United Front Work Department. So you can see then her positions then under that, and then how it translated down to which specific offices with whom she worked over the years. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of some of the cases that and God, there are many, many more, like 900 plus more. But just to kind of get our feet wet in cases, let's take a look at some of the analysis of what all these cases tell us. Well, if you're taking a look at just espionage, okay, pure, simple 18 USC 790 series espionage, you find that the Ministry of State Security, and again, leaving out, any type of cyber, Ministry of State Security is responsible for about half of that, about 48%. 32% is the PLA. Other espionage elements, which could be, again, Ministry of Public Security or think tanks in China, research institutes are responsible for about 17%. They track back to those. So you can see this. I mean, it would be expected about, at least to have half of it that goes back to this intelligence service and of course the PLA. What I'll just say to be kind of cautious about is this slide, and consider this in the context of everything that we'll talk about. This shows the basic level of effort that the PRC puts towards all categories of espionage. So you can see about 25% of that is just strictly on economic espionage. Okay, 19% on espionage, but this is really a false figure. Okay, so don't get too wrapped up with that as a figure. And it is because it includes Taiwan. And over a third, somewhere between a third and half the cases of espionage are targeted against Taiwan. So if you were to take this out of the equation, that 19, take Taiwan out of the equation, this would drop to about 10%. So, and the others would, look accordingly. But so economic espionage, again, if you would add up things like EAR, AISA, AIPA, and ITAR, I mean, you would get a much larger percentage, right? We have 20 plus 37%, but you would get a much larger percentage of, over 40% just targeting technologies. Now, you can break this down even further, striate it. So, and this might be a little difficult to understand. I'm sorry, it's not the greatest slide. I apologize for that. But if you take a look at the columns here, you have Ministry of State Security, PLA, PRC, other, and state-owned enterprises. And then you have type of tradecraft reflected in the different colored boxes. So if we take a look across the top then, and say Ministry of State Security, well, we have 24 cases where they had tailor-made devices, techniques, or did third country meetings or cutouts for transmitting information. Now, I can tell you even, and you can look at this trend over time, that this has gone up considerably, which means their tradecraft is improving. They're using this more frequently than than previously. So that has gone. But and again, this is sort of over time. So you can see things like, look at that 16 cases. They use no tradecraft at all, and had open comms, open emails for doing this. And I mean, crazy stuff. Things like, well, don't say MSS, use the word bananas, and I don't mean that as a joke. I mean that literally. So, wide variances in tradecraft. Kind of this would be a standard for the Ministry of State Security. You can see the numbers there. Commercial encryption, standard hiding techniques, and meeting in China. That's to protect the case officer, right? Come and meet in China. And we also see a big bulk of that in the PLA as well. So let's do our meetings in China. It's safer to do things out of China. Now, again, this is a slide that's probably over the last 10 years. So it doesn't really reflect all the immediate changes that we're seeing in PRC tradecraft. But it does reflect that the tradecraft isn't consistent and hasn't been consistent. And that, I mean, I could go into an entire backstory of why that's the case, because these are run out of provincial level offices, at municipal level offices. And although they have approvals and such with the headquarters level, they're really run by the local political legal leading group at the commission level, at the provincial level. So the level of integration between those offices and the Ministry of State Security locally at a provincial level is pretty tight, and there's a lot of pressure, even to the point where you have different people sitting on different committees between those organizations. So they really keep a very, very tight control over the MSS at provincial levels, and they do much of the guidance for their operational activities. Again, they have to get approvals and stuff at the national level, but they really do the guidance, the hands-on oversight of it right there locally. And there's a lot of pressure put on MSS people to produce. I mean, lots of pressure. And you can read some in a case of Xu Yanjun, which came out with thousands of documents. And he talked about how he hated his bosses, and talked about the relentless pressure, and an email saying the constant pressure to produce leads to shortcuts. So you have variances in tradecraft that go all throughout here. I don't know what that tells us about training, but that's yet another issue to kind of look into to understand it more. Training and oversight. Okay, so this is just a total of espionage cases, and I'm sorry, it seems to have gone over the total amount, the screen. But you can see research violations, ITAR, AIPA, 195 espionage cases, economic espionage, 213 cases. So you can see kind of how that works out for a total of 922 cases at this time. Again, if we're just looking at Made in China 2025, I have 520 cases. This number here, the information technology, has grown substantially since 2015. I've watched that shoot off the scale, and that was because that was when we first sanctioned ZTE for selling to Iran, and when we first started making semiconductors an issue. Prior to that time, I mean, the DJI drones, 36% of the semiconductors used in them were from U.S. sources. So so China really made an effort to go out, and they're still making an effort to go out and get their own semiconductors. And to do that, they have a phrase that they call standing on the shoulder of the giant. And to do that, they're going out and stealing the technology and the manufacturing capabilities to do it. This number has gone up 25% over the last few years since COVID. And no difficulty in understanding that. China's making a move towards a commercial sector and really does dominate now biopharma, vaccine production. Sorry, I think they call it API, the chemicals that are used to create pharmaceuticals, have a complete dominance on it worldwide. And this was a concerted drive on their part, and part of that involved stealing a lot of the biopharma formulas and technology. Aerospace and aeronautical equipment. So there are 126 cases. That's been a very, very aggressive area of theft for China. About half of those are military technologies, military-related technologies. Okay, if we were to just kind of break it down, let me see if this is, yeah. Breaking it down is looking at the whole thing. This was a DNI's list I took of sort of critical technologies that were, in the United States collected. And I just highlighted the areas that I've seen focused effort on Chinese collection efforts, their espionage collection efforts. And these are the areas that you see a strong focus on, multiple cases in each one. To close out on just looking at Tradecraft just a bit, if you take a look at the characteristics that we see in Tradecraft, on the left, the individual, Kevin Mallory, Thomas Zhao, Dixon Yo, Gurley Mutzo, lawyer, and Patrick Way, another classified case which hasn't been released publicly, and Corbin Schultz. Most of these persons, Estonia was, by the way, Gurley Mutzo. Most of these persons were recruited online. Okay, in almost every case except Corbin Schultz, but in every case it was a think tank was the cover that was used. And the tasking and control was done either online exclusively or online and in China. Okay, the CovCom that was used, some cases specialized CovCom. We've seen the most recent case, I can tell you, Chen Yuanci, who was just arrested recently with one other MSS asset. And they have gravitated now moving towards using laptops with special encryption software. And they had a person actually come and do that and load up the laptop with that so that they can communicate. So that's been an expansion that we've seen, but we have definitely most seen a move from commercial in the initial approaches, WeChat and such, commercial espionage, or rather commercial encryption, to then moving towards more secure encrypted comms as this person proves out to be an asset. So again, starting with the WeChat or Telegram, both because the U.S. government can't get access to those records, Telegram being run by Russia and WeChat by China. But then moving on from there to encrypted comms, we see a lot of uploading to encrypted platforms that China has set up for these purposes. So again, you can see that type of movement into encrypted comms. This has been just a function of the last few years, the last 2-3 years. Subsources. In those cases that you see, in every one of those cases, the PRC intelligence officers were pushing the individuals, understanding their limited life, their limited use, limited exposure, limited security clearances, were pushing them to develop subsources. Okay, let's take about the next 10 minutes and talk about motivations for espionage, Chinese espionage. I call this segment Getting Rid of the Mice. And that is because for all those of you who have grown up in the counterintelligence world, you've heard the terminology money, ideology, coercion, and ego as reasons to conduct espionage, MICE, the acronym being. However, China does have a whole of society approach. And when you have a whole of society approach and you're collecting on everything from economic information to technologies to dissident organizations to political apparatus, it's only common sense that the motivations that are used for recruitment and to keep a person spying are going to be different. I mean, that are going to be far more expansive because you got a far more expansive set of targets. So this actually someone mentioned in one of my online courses that I have on this and said, Nick, you should factor in mice to there. And my immediate reaction was, hey, well, why? Because mice really doesn't matter. And then I thought, wow, wait a minute, mice doesn't matter. It really doesn't. So that's when I started this research effort, which resulted in a paper and part of the update on my book. In those 920 cases that I looked at, for all across the board, approximately 550 cases you could correlate to specific motivations. Okay. And you saw the motivations I had listed earlier, right? Money, business, etc. I'll discuss them, but it's a flawed approach. I'll be the first to say now. And the reason being is that, number one, you can't always tell what's in the human heart, like what a person really, really is thinking. I'm doing this for Mother China. I've read that a dozen times. Well, would you be doing it for Mother China if you weren't getting $175,000? That's another question. So you can't determine it necessarily. You're limited. However, that said, the power of it is that if in 100 cases a person's saying that, then you have some understanding that it's done for ethno-nationalistic purposes. So I came up with a new acronym. If you haven't already been screenshotting, this would be a good time. Business opportunities. The acronym is BEWARE. Business opportunities, as we saw in the Linda Sun case. Ethno-nationalism, which is service to Mother China and the Chinese people, and I distinguish that from nationalism, as in just to democracy or an ideology. It is ethno-nationalism. Wealth or money, cash payments and wire transfers. Academic advancement. So we've seen academic advancement used as a barter for bringing stolen research over to China. And I've actually read those emails back, I want an associate professorship for this. No, you bring the research back and we'll give you an assistant professorship. No, it's got to be an associate. I mean, you literally have those discussions ongoing. So academic, and that is because of a Confucian-based background and because it's so, such a historic tradition in China, and being an academic is a revered thing, being a professor. Repression or coercion. We see some of that, not as much as you would think. And then emotional bonds, obligation, and friendship. China is, in its essence, a humanistic society, right? It is not like the legalistic society we have in the United States. It's not, they don't have the rule of law, maybe the rule by law, but certainly not the rule of law. Everything is done through obligation and friendships. I mean, goes back for thousands of years to the days of Confucius. And so it's a real different, if you're a counterintelligence type, it's an incredibly different environment in which to work. Okay, so if we were to look at the total espionage motivations, for everything, you would see that 51% of the time money is the motivation, okay? Nationalism, surprisingly, 23% of the time. Academics, 3%. And you can see the rest. Business, 22%. But this is across the board, across everything. Okay, just look at how the figures strike you here. Okay, 51% for money, 22% for business, and 23% for nationalism. Change that, and we look at economic motivations, and this jumps up to 61. So business, that Linda Sun relationship business jumps up to 61. Money is 24. And nationalism drops to 13%. So this economic espionage is more about setting up a competing business in China, right? And so the motivations, as you can see, are different. And when the motivations are different, the actual tactics on the ground are different. And that's why it's not the same stealing technology or anything else, because you have to do things a different way. If it's economic espionage, you have to set up business relationships, their bank accounts, you're communicating with other businesses, you're getting legal issues done. All that leaves, a trail a mile wide type of thing. It's a different situation, and there are different indicators that you get as a result in these economic espionage motivations. So that's what I actually did. I went back in all these, and I'm going to wrap up in just a minute or two here. This is primarily an insider threat things. There are no issues of, NDAs are ignored all the time. Extensive email communications. But counterparts, you can see this. There's a lot of traveling to China, often lying about the nature and area of the travel. Much of that travel is done through just prior to a formal resignation. Some actually have sent resignations while abroad. I've seen WeChat groups used for fundraising, for communications and fundraising in China, to build up businesses. So, and things like academic and applications for communications for funding with state-owned enterprises or with talent programs, etc., to get money for this is often done pretty well in the open. That sort of has to be done. So these guys are vulnerable at that point because those communications are open. Okay. I'm going to have to speed through this. I apologize, but definitely not going to get to cover because I should be ending this about now. Technology has different motivations. Look at the motivations for technology. We had 61% business. Here we have 72% is money. Okay. So when they're talking about the illegal export of technology, it is a cash and carry business. It's not, they're not looking to do a business in the, in China. At this point, when it's related to export violations, it's about money. Okay, and some of the indicators there, these are mostly external, vice internal threats. Okay, so this is not an insider threat issue for that type of, for most of the time. Of course, you're going to get, there's a Raytheon case 2018 that's different. There's a lot of cases that are different. But if you're talking about bulk numbers of this, then most of the time it's an external issue. Use of freight forwarding firms. We've seen the MSS of PLA and state-owned enterprises hiring agents. Sometimes they lack a complete knowledge of the technology that they're looking for. I have seen that happen where they don't know, they have a part number, but they don't know the use of the technology. So it's, I've seen restaurant owners try this and they're just completely out of their league, but it's just done for cash. And so you can imagine that there's the shipping of money and things like that through front companies or fake websites and stuff that come along with that. Again, other indicators. MSS operations, about 49% are money. So we're back down to about half of them being money. 33% is that ethno-nationalism I told you about. Emotions, 10%. That emotions is kind of interesting because it reaches back for people who have known each other for a long period of time. And they say, hey, you remember me and I'm from your district and blah, blah, blah. And so there is an a humanistic emotion aspect that the MSS works with to be able to get people to conduct operations, MSS operations. Okay, and if we're just looking about Chinese espionage, not the other areas, but just espionage motivations, then it's about 68% is money and 25% nationalism. And that kind of makes sense because if you're just looking at espionage, a lot of the people that they go after, Kevin Mallory and such, and are not, ethnically Chinese. So it's all a money deal for those individuals. Okay. I'm going to pass through this just because I don't have time to address it and because I do want to finish on time. It's 45 minutes and 10 seconds that we've gone through. I'll close with a couple of things. Number one is that, obviously this was a reflection of my book. My website, shinobyenterprises.com, I post a lot of many of my lectures. So this briefing I'll post there as I do many others, my academic papers, my other things. So some of these slides I'll post there. So as well as my book. So if you I'm making it sort of like a library for people who need this type of information. So if you're into this and you want to start looking at it, this would be a place to go to be able to collect that type of information specifically on this subject. That and the last thing, I could give a whole same briefing on just the changes in tradecraft that we've seen over the past few years. And it's been extraordinary change. So keep tuned to this very closely because you'll see a lot of like the Chen Yuanzi case is servicing a dead drop. We've only seen that one other time, and that was with Edward Peng a couple of years ago. So we see China doing a lot more or trying to do a lot more on the ground, in the US. I think that's going to continue. Okay, thank you very much for your time. For those of you still awake, I'm happy to take any questions.
Hi, sir. So it looks like we have a couple questions already published. Edward had asked earlier, would it have been suspicious for her to have so many roles with NYS? I'm not sure who this is referring to.
Linda's son.
Linda's, yeah.
No, because those were over something like 12 years. So it was just, she moved around community liaison positions, all relative to China. So of course, and developed a knowledge base over a period of time, right? So it all focused back, back to her. So no, not suspicious at all, just different jobs.
Wonderful. Somebody else had asked what roles has universities in China and abroad played in collection of information?
So I have about 60 universities that, in that associates column, that 60 universities that I've identified that have had a role in collecting information. Sometimes it's directed. Actually, sometimes we've seen them in contact with the state council on collecting information. Sometimes it's they fund it. They have funded production of factories and technologies that have been stolen with the full knowledge that they're stolen. So, and in some cases, multiple times for universities. Beijing University, some of the Seven Sons of China, many of these have just done it. And it's not just them, the Nanjing Aeronautical Astronautical University. And not only do they collect, but have worked hand in hand with the MSS for recruiting students and for acting as fronts. So in the case of Shuyangjun, that the Nanjing Aeronautical Astronautical University actually acted as a front for recruiting individuals and bringing them into China on lectures, working with the MSS doing that. So very, very close relationship.
Wonderful. Our next one is from Parzo. When looking at the motivations, you highlighted financial incentives appearing at almost 25%, and yet so many of the specific cases you mentioned had quite poor payment. What do you ascribe to that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
When looking at the motivations, you highlighted financial incentives appearing at almost 25%, and yet so many of the specific cases you mentioned had quite poor payment. What do you ascribe to that?
Quite poor payment. Let's table that because I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. Wonderful. We can move on. Thank you for the wonderful speech. I'm a Chinese national currently working at the covert group as a consultant in the United States. If I want to communicate with my family in China without the Chinese authority intercepting our conversations, what communications methods would you recommend?
So I'm going to tell you that Signal and what's the other one that is so common? Gosh, help me out. Signal and WhatsApp. But you need to understand that, look, those are the main targets of China's intelligence agencies, right? So, that I use it, but I understand that they're in the bullseye. That's what China's going to target, for collection. So I don't know what that means. Your best way is to do it face to face.
Wonderful. One person asked, are all 922 cases in the US?
No, not at all. Worldwide.
What are the conviction rates for these cases, if anything, the ones you spoke on? Excellent talk, by the way.
Thank you. So every case I get, if a person's acquitted, I usually don't count it in. It just, unless it's a technicality type of thing. And that is the work part of the database, because I have to go back all the time when the person is convicted. But I can't say the conviction rates because it's always 2 or 3 or 4 years. I mean, look at, Patrick Way, same thing. It's been now over a year, and it'll be another year before the guy is convicted. We just had another recent case where a person was convicted and did the crime in 2022. So it's a constant moving back and changing the status of the person to convicted. So, but the vast majority of them, obviously are going to be convicted. But then again, on the other hand, I also get a lot of people telling me about, in this country or that country, they have a case and the person, they just quietly kick them out or something like that. So, depends what you want to call a conviction in a way. When they expel a person, okay, I'll call that a conviction.
Wonderful. Andrew asks, how can those of us who want to work in the IC prepare ourselves to help in CI against China? Well,
that's a real tough one. So I as I think I said before, I teach a whole lot of courses on this online, in fact. And what you find, and what I always ask, and what you find is that people, we had 5,000 people trained up in Russia and the Soviet Union during the heydays of the Cold War. And we got nothing like that in China. We're starting to get people in, but understanding the thinking process and how they work is long, hard, and it's work. I mean, and the IC has so much work to do, not only in understanding their adversary here, but in organizing themselves to contend with the adversary, because they don't, they don't have we don't have the structure in place to deal with the type of espionage that they have. We're very good at protecting ourselves. I tell the CI types all the time, yeah, I know you guys I'm not worried about you, because you'll circle the wagons, you'll throw a bunch of blankets on top, you'll sit up there with a shotgun and say, hooray, the world's free for democracy. But that doesn't help Procter and Gamble. It doesn't help, some widget maker on the West Coast who's, it didn't help our solar industry, didn't help our steel industry when all those secrets were stolen. So we don't have the infrastructure and the setup to really work effectively as a whole of society response to China. So it's just going to be a lot of work at a grassroots level to do this.
Wonderful. We have time for just a few more questions. KG asked, how can the US better mitigate espionage through persons engaged in the naturalization process? Is profiling an underestimated tactic?
So, it used to be that that for those of you who know this, historically, that we used to interview people who came to the United States for naturalization. And in fact, some of our best work against the old Soviet Union was in that. I mean, far better than the spy games. So we don't. I mean, and particularly in the last few years, people just ran across the border and, no one was interviewed at all. So understanding the people that are coming in is sort of the first step in that process. There's even in employment and things like that, there are also means of understanding where the person studied, what the likelihood is of compromise, and those types of things. So it's a matter of redoing, actually, maybe not redoing, but implementing some of the things that we did quite well in the 80s.
Wonderful. And our last question is, do you think the US is moving towards another Cold War with China as we continue to compete for influence in the Pacific, Africa, and South America?
There's a yes and no to that question. The yes is absolutely. And the no is, I don't know what a Cold War means in this context. I mean, I knew what it meant in the Soviet Union, and that was pretty easy. They were on one side, we were on the other, and we occasionally bellowed at each other. But China, there's an intertwined economic relationship. China's assertive in a whole different way. It's pushing a model that Russia tried to push its model, and it had to by brute force because nobody wanted it. But China's a lot more sophisticated, and they're a lot better in AI, and they're a lot better, in their public perception management. So are we going to be at odds? Yeah, and I don't think that's going to get any better. What type of unrestricted warfare is going to be let loose is sort of more the question, and how we contend with it. So answer to your question is yes.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all the time that we have for questions. I would like to thank you, Mr. Nicholas Eftimiades, our sponsors, and all of you who joined us today. For those interested in learning more about our courses and applying to study at IWP, please speak with a member of our staff at the conclusion of today's event, or visit us online at iwp.edu. Lastly, we hope you all will save the date for IWP's 35th annual anniversary gala on Thursday, October 9th at the National Portrait Gallery. Tickets and sponsorship options are now available on our website at iwp.edu/gala, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much again for joining us.